Welcome back to another episode of Trustcast. I'm excited today because I have Dalton Jensen. And one of the cool things about Dalton is I consider him a friend, and we've only met once before. I went to his house and we recorded a podcast together. But after that one interaction, I really do genuinely consider Dalton to be one of my good friends. So welcome to the show, Dalton. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, man. We killed it on that podcast. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I like to dive into that a little bit in this podcast episode because I feel like a lot of people feel that way about you, and I think you're kind of the master trust builder. We both belong to a Facebook group that is basically a local business networking group, and I swear everyone in that group knows who Dalton is. He's just really good at networking and building trust, so I appreciate that about you, man.
Yeah, I really like that group too. I found it by accident, thankfully, and it's been a lot of fun, dude. We just get to know people.
I want to dive into that just a little bit. I guess before we even start into anything else, how you can use Facebook groups or any social media actually to build trust. What are some of your strategies when it comes to that?
Well, I think my first strategy is just coming from a place of genuine care. One of my big things for that I've learned from tons of different people in the social media platform, in that social media kind of marketers and gurus, is, just giving a lot of stuff away for free. Like, my ideas, aren't my original ideas. And, I'm not married to anything that I give away. So for me, the first place it starts is from that place of I genuinely want people to win. And I know that there's, I don't believe in scarcity. So when someone else wins, it doesn't mean that I don't win. And I think when people start from that kind of mindset, you can start to build a lot of trust because people understand, because people genuinely believe that, hey, I want you to win, and you winning doesn't mean that I don't win. And then I think the second thing is coming from a place of truth. So offering a lot of good quality, hey, this is what I would do. If somebody's starting a business and they're like, hey, my product's for everybody, I'll have a hard conversation with them, or I'll try to make the comment that I say as nice as I can. But, you can't cater to everybody, right? Not even Amazon caters to everybody. They have a specific group. And one thing that trust does is you create new customers, right? You pull people into a demographic that you want them to be into. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but those are the two things. I start with genuinely wanting everybody to win, and then I just come from a place of truth.
And do you feel like that genuine care and wanting other people to win, is that just an innate attribute that you have, or is there a way that people can develop that if that's not something that they have?
I think that anybody can develop that. I definitely think I had to learn it, because it's hard, right? You have a podcast and I have a podcast. And some people can kind of see that as competition, but I had to learn, my sales career helped me learn that, first of all, if somebody else wins, right? So in sales, a lot of times people in business, people will be like, I need people who are competitive. Well, I don't really believe that competitive in the sense of a sports analogy, right? Because I believe that if I don't play defense, I'm not really competing. Does that make sense? And what I mean by defense is when we play a sport or something like that, or when you're in, band competitions or whatever kind of competition you're in, you're playing defense. There's always a way to stop somebody else from scoring. But in business, you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to, and especially if you're on a sales team and, you're on the sales floor, you don't want to actively be trying to diminish someone else's rewards. Does that make sense? Or progress. So for me, I'm not competitive. I genuinely want people to win. And I think it comes from the fact that I genuinely believe that when other people succeed, I succeed, and that things just come back to me. And it takes a long time for things to come back to you. And some people may never, it may never come back to you the way you think it will. But I believe that as you do the right things because they're the right things, and as you approach business from not necessarily a competitive standpoint, but from I want to win and I want everybody else to win with me, then I think you can develop that mindset, like the scarcity mindset. A lot of people think that like if somebody listens to your podcast, they're not going to listen to mine. And like,
Yeah.
obviously that's not true, right?
Yeah. And I think that I don't know historically like why this is the case, but I feel like this is a relatively new thing in business. A lot
Yeah.
of kind of the older business mentalities were very much of a competition and let's see what our competitors are doing and how can we
Right.
stifle them and how can we grow? And if someone else is growing, then we can't grow. And
Yeah.
but I feel like there's just I don't know. There's too much to go around. Like,
Yeah,
as a
exactly.
website designer, I don't care. I don't care at all if somebody else builds your website. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, as long as you've got an awesome website, man, that's amazing. I love that. Because here's the thing, I'm as busy as I can be anyways. Like,
Right.
obviously I could scale. I can grow my team. I can probably do a little bit more to be able to take on more. But right now I'm busy. Like I probably couldn't take on a whole lot more clients if even if I had them. And so I think having that abundance mindset
Yeah.
is really important in business and just being willing to say, "Hey, there's enough business for everyone. There's enough business to go around."
Yeah. Well, I think it's part of that psychology of business and of sales, right? And of marketing. You know, when people feel like, I call it, because I've heard it called this before, but I call it commission breath, right? And people can smell it, like when you want it too bad, or when you know what I mean? When people, but you can feel it, like, and it might not be a salesman, although that's like the main analogy that we use, right? But businesses, right? You know, you can tell when someone's trying too hard. It just puts you on the defensive a little bit, right? When someone's trying too hard. So if you come in from this mindset that's like, hey, look, I have this product to offer. If I believe here X, Y, and Z, here's why, I believe that, highlighting your differences is important, because where there's no difference, there can be no preference. But highlighting the differences, genuinely wanting your customer to succeed, builds trust right there. I mean, that's a big part. I tell this to people all the time. Find a marketing plan or a business plan or a sales plan that really develops customer needs. So you ask them a lot of questions, because when somebody feels like you're pitching them, like a pitch is when I don't know anything about you and I'm trying to sell you something. Sales is when I know what you want. I know your situation. I'm trying to work with you and teach you. And then we can come to an agreement, right?
I had an interview with a sales expert a couple weeks ago, and we talked about that. And I've used this analogy before on the podcast, but I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And the one thing I hate about that platform is the fact that random people that have never met me before, they've never talked to me
Yeah.
before, come on and they just throw me a sales pitch.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's even a product I would have been interested in, but I'm not interested in their sales tactics, so I absolutely am
Yeah.
not going to engage in it.
Right.
What I'd much rather is connect with me, start talking to me, get to know me, like
Yeah.
connect with me on a human level. And
Yeah.
then eventually I'm probably going to be the one to ask you, "Hey, what do you do?" And at that point, I'm more than willing to maybe purchase from you. And so
Of
it's
course.
all about just it's being a good person, right? Just
Yeah, 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 yeah.
being
Well,
genuinely
and
interested.
you got to do it all too. Like, I'm the same way as you. Like, I've had pitches where I'm like, wow, that was really good. Because I'm a sales guy and I'm like, I can appreciate, like, that was good. All right, I'll
Yeah.
listen to you. But I've had other ones where I'm like, dude, you have no idea. I hate the ones where they think that I am like a decision maker in my business. All you would have had to do is ask me, and I would have been like, no, that's not me, but I'll point you in the right direction. But, you didn't even like, hey, are you the person I'm supposed to be talking? But like those questions, right? Like, hey, I don't want to waste your time. Are you the person I'm supposed to be talking to?
Right.
I'd be like, no, but I know who. But you didn't even ask me, right? And so questions build authentic trust, and questions build authentic urgency as well.
Ooh, I love that. Ask more questions. Like you can
You
never
should,
go
yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. Okay. And on this same vein of kind of the abundancy mindset versus the scarcity mindset, I'd like to talk a little bit about competition and
Hmm.
how competition actually improves innovation. I worked for
Yeah.
Apple for a while, and I wasn't like a product person at Apple in any means. I was in a more of a marketing role. But a lot of times, like if a competitor to Apple would come out with some cool feature, I'd have family and friends reach
Yeah.
out to me and be like, "Yo, dude, like Samsung came out with this. Apple's dumb." And I would always say, "Well,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Like I'm so happy that another person, a competitor, is creating this amazing feature. Why? Because that's going to encourage Apple to have to compete on that." And
Right.
so I
Right.
actually don't see a competitor doing something well as a problem. In fact, I
Yeah.
say that's the power of the capitalist mindset and of competition in our economy is it just
Mhm.
improves innovation across the board. So what are your thoughts on that and on competition? Do you think competition's a healthy thing?
Yeah, I totally think competition's a healthy thing. Well, I mean, it keeps you on your toes, just like you said. It's a chance for us to really figure out what we want to do and who you want to be. So, like, yeah, But here's the cool thing: since I'll stay with like the Apple, analogy, right? They built an impressive brand, and that's something that you can't. That's something that's really hard to compete with. So you create these extra features and it pulls people because I love these features, but man, there's something so powerful about a brand. And like people
Mm-hmm.
try and you trust Apple, you like Apple, you like right, I used to work for Honda and Honda was kind of the same way, right? Really good car, really good stuff, and they would be, 2 or 3 years, 4 years behind some other manufacturers on technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't really hurt you. It didn't really hurt Honda because we had a brand, man. I'd be like, yeah, I'd be like, you could go buy whatever and get the cool features, and I think you should if you like it, right? But if you want Honda, if you want what you've always wanted, you know what I mean? If you want why you love Honda, then you'll come back. And most of the time, people came back, and if we lose some people, sure. But again, like not that big of a deal
Mm-hmm.
because if you love what you do and if you have a brand that you can stand behind, that's all right, dude. And people always come back. That's the other thing is like maybe I don't use you on a web design this time, but I can come back. You know what I mean? But if we have that relationship, like I used to tell people all the time, like that's not the only car they're gonna buy. That's not the only machine they're ever gonna buy. That's not the only software they're ever gonna buy. Like there's always another opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at the end of the day, it almost sounds like, I mean, we just need
Yeah.
to not care so much.
Here's what I tell people when we talk about sales and when we talk about business and when we talk about clients. Look, it's just like when you're in the dating scene or when you're trying to find something, trying to find a business partner or something like that. You don't go to the business partner or a partner that you want to date if they don't have some confidence. You know what I mean? Like there's and obviously, okay, look, obviously there's exceptions to every rule. All right, I'm not saying that, but but what I am saying is like it's a psychology thing. Like if you came up to me, like I'm a pretty big guy, like I got a beard, I'm big, and I'm bald, right? So if you saw me, you might not come up to me right away, but people are attracted to confidence. And so what I tell people is like if you're confident and you're relaxed, that's a real quick way to gaining trust, right? And so just be confident. Like, just, I always use this term, but it's funny for me. Like, if you want to be a really good salesman, you need to get some gangster attitudes. Like, I don't care. I will find a way to get paid regardless of what happens, right? And when you have that kind of confidence that, like, no one thing can bother me, like, no one thing can kill my attitude, you're going to attract a lot more people because they're like, oh, okay, right? Because if somebody feels like you've got something to lose and they're the person that can, you've got something to lose and now I'm going after you to get it or whatever, like that'll scare people away. But if you're confident and you're like, look, man, you can buy from him, you can buy from him. But either way, I'm going to get my money. Either way, I'm going to get my customer service. Either way, right? Then people will, then that is attractive.
100%. And I was actually having a conversation. It was probably a couple months ago at this point, with some of the people that I'm working on this podcast with. And we were just talking about the brand values of my company and JMH Media and who we wanted to be. And the conversation came up that we don't want to be desperate. And I thought that was really interesting. We don't ever want to go into a sales call like being desperate, because if you're desperate, or if you need that other person to buy from you, then the negotiation is also going to go way downhill, because you're going to let them run all over you because you're the one that needs them. But if at the end of the day, like you're saying, you're confident and you say, this is the value we can provide to you and this is what it's worth, and even if you don't buy from us today, that's okay. Like you said, we're going to get our money anyway. We're going to find some other people.
Yeah, I'm going to find somebody, right?
Yeah, that people like that confidence. So yeah, super interesting.
They really do. Well, that selling desperate, that's what I call it. That's commission breath, right? Please buy from me. Please buy from me. Like, no, something is wrong then, right? And I read in a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. If you haven't read that one, you should read it.
I haven't, so I'll have to read it.
Dude, that's a great one. But one of his main there's a lot in that book, but one of the ones that I always remember is if you can't say no, it's a bad deal. So like if I approach a negotiation with you and I'm selling you something and I can't say no, it's going to be a bad deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to be able to say no.
I think you need to be able to practice saying no too, in business and also in your personal life. I think your personal life is a great place to practice saying no. Because at the end of the day, like there's going to come a point in your life where you have to prioritize things, and you have to say, this is more important than this. X is more important than Y. And so you have to be willing to make those decisions and stick to them. So
yeah. And that's it. So how does that relate to trust, right? People trust people who have boundaries, right? And if you can set good boundaries in your business, they're like, hey, look, we know what we're worth, and are we willing to negotiate? We're willing to negotiate, but I'm also willing to say no and walk away. And you know what I mean? So we help people, but we also know what we're worth, and that's a good lesson for, gosh, dude, that's a good lesson for life. You know what I'm saying? Man. Like, set good boundaries, and people will trust you. They know you won't blow with every wind that comes along.
Yeah, and it sounds a little bit counterintuitive. I think our natural inclination is to think that it's the opposite, to think, oh, I have to bend over backwards to accommodate this person so that they'll like me or so that they'll trust me. And there's a point where like you have to be willing to give, like we've already talked about. But at the same time, people are attracted to people who take care of themselves. And if you aren't, if you're letting other people run over you, or you're bending over backwards at every other person, then that's not the type of person that's going to build trust.
Well, and people think that there's something wrong. Like if they're trying that hard to sell something, like, should I really buy it? You know, one of the 48 laws of power that Robert Greene talks about in his book, The 48 Laws of Power, is talk less. And you can definitely talk your way out of a deal. And it's when you start being desperate.
Very interesting.
That book's, you got to be careful with that book, but there's a few nuggets that you can get from it that are cool.
Well, I haven't read that one either, so I'm just kind of building my book list as I'm talking to you, Dalton. I love it.
Oh, dude, it's good, man. I like that one.
Okay, I'll have to look into that one too. I'd like to talk a little bit about your podcast, because I think you're doing something very unique with your podcast. And the reason I say that is because the people that have been guests on your show are like super advocates of your show. And like I said, I reached out in this Facebook group and said, hey, like I need some podcast guests, and everyone was tagging you. They were like, oh, talk to Dalton. And I was like, dude, Dalton's doing something right, like with this podcast, because everybody who comes off of it is your biggest fan and your biggest advocate. So let's talk a little bit about your show. What's your show? What's its purpose? And then maybe let's talk a little bit about what you're doing to build this trust with your guests. Yeah,
the show is, and this is what I was talking about earlier, but the show is only to have small business owners come on and share their story. When the pandemic hit, I knew that there were small businesses who were going to cut their marketing budget because that's just what you do. And for good or for better or for worse, that's what they did. And so I brought them on so that they could tell their story, so that they could have a good place to get, to tell the whole story too, right? Like building a brand is good, and you can build a brand in short segments, and people should. But there's also a cool place where people will sit down and they'll listen to a 45-minute, an hour-long podcast. And that's what I wanted to bring to people. I just help people. I just want people to succeed. I want the small businesses to make it. I love supporting local people. I shop at Walmart and Amazon, right? But I also like to shop with small businesses because it means something. And when you can have other people succeed, like people trust you. Like, have I benefited from my podcast? Of course, but other people have benefited just as much or more than me, and that's what matters. And so I'll never try to be like, I do all this stuff for free or whatever. But when the tide rises, all the boats rise, and that's what I was looking to do.
I love that so much. I think that content marketing is such a powerful thing, and podcasting. I'm a huge advocate of podcasting. I think every business should have a podcast,
right?
And that's to market their business. I think the problem that a lot of podcasts have is they go into it with that mindset that this is to grow my business, and this is to be a marketing tool, and this is an asset, which it is. But I think if you have that mindset, it won't be as effective because its purpose isn't to help, isn't to rise the tide, like you were saying.
Right. Well, and that's what we like, dude. You know what I mean? Because I just feel like at the end of the day, this podcast, if something happened and I couldn't publish another episode, and let's say even all of my episodes were taken offline, my relationships that I have with the people that I met will always be there. And those are more valuable than anything else, because there's that law of reciprocity, right? Like that, so I'll say two things about the law of reciprocity. The law of reciprocity is like things like because statements, like they did that study where they cut in line. They asked people to cut in line to the copier, and the people who didn't have a reason weren't allowed in front. But the reason was as simple as like, can I cut in line because I need to meet a deadline? People were 75% more likely to get in front of the line, right?
Interesting. Okay.
It's a give and take thing. The second thing I'll say about the law of reciprocity is that's not why you should do it. Yeah. I believe in doing the right thing just because it's the right thing, and things come back and people return favors and people love you back. That just inevitably happens. But if you start with, I'm going to do this with no expectation of anything in return, you're going to be a lot happier, and you're going to be so much more happier when the love comes back your way. So that's what I think. But why does the love come back? Because you did it with the right intention. That's
100%. Yeah. And people see through you. Like if you don't have those right intentions, and this goes back, I mean, we've said this multiple times already, but that breath,
but you're right,
like
but they know.
You can smell it a mile away. Interesting. Okay. So we go into this with a good attitude to actually help people. And but the benefits do come. And so I would like to talk about those benefits, even though I think it's important that we made it clear that that's not the reason we do it. But what benefits have you seen from your podcast? I know that you have a CBD company. Have you seen leads coming into that, or what are the benefits that you've seen from your podcast?
I started the podcast so that I could plug my CBD business.
Yeah.
That's what I did it for. Like every episode is sponsored by Happiest. So that's a benefit. The benefit is I'll tell you the craziest story. Okay. I interviewed local here in Utah. There's a restaurant chain called Mo Betta's, Hawaiian style food. I love Mo Betta's. Like, I'm Hawaiian. That's my jam. I love every Hawaiian restaurant that I can find. I will, though, tell you that the co-founder of Mo Betta's, so it was founded by two brothers, Chemo Mac and Kalani Mac. I got to interview Chemo Mac, and they're doing very well. They just opened they're on their 16th or 17th restaurant. Wow. Started in Bountiful, Utah in 2008. right before the crash, during the crash. He's doing very well, and the smartest business dude you'll ever meet in your life. And here's the benefit that I got from podcasting. That dude Chemo Mac is the nicest man in the world. But think about getting a lunch with Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett. In fact, a lunch with Warren Buffett was just auctioned off last year for $4.5 million. That's how much someone paid to have lunch with Warren Buffett. And I'm telling you, and everybody who's listening, that there are people next door to you who live the life you want to live, who make the money you want to make, and who will sit down with you and give you all the info you need. Chemo Max spent 2 hours with me on my podcast and gave me millions of dollars worth of nuggets.
Yeah.
And info. And I just invited him to be on a podcast. And I mean, obviously I'll go back and say, Chemo Max, the nicest dude you'll ever meet. And his restaurant is the bomb. Like, Mo Betta's is the bomb. He did something right. But what I'm saying is, what I benefited from and what I want other people to know is that there's somebody right next door that's making the money you want to make, that's living the life you want to live, and they will go and eat lunch with you, and you can and let them pick your brain, right? You might have to pay for the lunch, but it's probably not going to be $4.5 million. If you even get, and that's, by the way, that's if you even got to have lunch with Warren Buffett or Jeff Bezos or any of these guys, right? So the biggest benefit is sitting down with all these amazing business owners and learning from them. And then I get that because I just invited them on a podcast and we just talked, and I get to use all of that in my personal life. That's probably the biggest benefit.
I love it, man. Yeah, it's a networking tool. It's a tool to get to meet people and provide. Once again, we're coming back around full circle to provide value, right?
And trust.
It's amazing.
One last thing on that note is just don't be afraid to ask people. Get confident. Have something that you can offer. For me, it was like a podcast. That was it. You know what I mean? Anybody can start a podcast. They should go to you if they have questions about it.
Yeah. Well, feel free to let me know if you have questions about podcasting. I'm happy to help. But
Yes,
I agree. And that's one of the things since starting this podcast, and also the podcast that I had before. This is my second podcast, but I've been amazed at how willing people are to come on podcast interviews. Like, I thought that was going to be hard. I thought finding guests was going to be one of my issues. It has not been an issue. And the only time it has been an issue is if I've been lazy and haven't been staying on top of it. And then I have to say, okay, I need an interview this weekend, which is what I just did.
Right. I love it though.
But like, it's so easy to fill your schedule because so many people want to provide that value. So many people are just chomping at the bit to jump on an interview with someone and tell them all their secrets, which is so interesting to me.
Well, yeah, listen, right? Interesting people are interested. That's it. People who, if you want to build trust with somebody, be interested. That's it, man. Like, did you ever hear about that and I, by the way, I tried this and it freaking works. But again, in this Never Split the Difference book, this guy goes to a party and he uses this technique called mirroring, right? And that's when you go, somebody says, just for example, right? Man, I really love basketball. And you go, you really love basketball? And they tell you more, right? And they're like, I love it because I score a lot of points and I love being on my team. You love being on your team? And they tell you more about the team, right? And this guy had a whole conversation and never said one word other than, he didn't say anything except ask 2 or 3 questions. The guy left the conversation. He's like, wow, that guy's amazing. That guy is like, he's so fun to talk to. He's so interesting, right? And he was like, dude, I asked 5 questions. And I didn't even ask, they weren't even like original questions. They were just me mirroring, right? But people like to talk about themselves. And that's a good thing, by the way. That's a great thing.
You like talking about yourself?
Of course. Of course.
Trying out the tactic.
But it's, it's that give and take. When it's the time for me to talk about myself, I love it. But when it's a time for me to listen and ask questions, I listen and ask questions.
That's amazing. Yeah. And people love people who are interested in them and who want to listen. So, yeah.
That's a great technique, and you don't have to be special. Like, it's not a Jedi mind trick. You don't have to go to college to learn it, right? Yeah. All you got to do is and by the way, it's a really powerful, if we're talking about business and stuff, sales, it's a really powerful negotiating tool. If you don't know what to say, ask them a question, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, the price is too high. You pause. The price is too high. They'll tell you. They'll tell you.
Tell you why.
I promise they'll tell you. Well, it's $40,000. Is $40,000? Yeah. It's a good one.
So really, it's all just, I think the theme of this podcast, for me at least, has really been be interested in people and be interested in providing value to people and doing it for the right reasons because you actually care.
Yeah. Well, Amy Cuddy is a Harvard psychologist, Harvard professor. She wrote a book called Presence, and she actually, like, the whole thing that she studies is trust in people.
I have someone to reach out to be on the show then.
Yeah, dude. Amy Cuddy's great. She wrote a book called Presence. She's a Harvard professor, but she did a study, and she said people measure trust off of two things, two questions, right? I forgot the specific words she uses, but I remember the questions. Do they care, and can they help me, right? Care, and I remember the words care and competence. So do they know? So in order for us to trust somebody, like, they got to know that we care, like, genuinely that we want the best for them, right? So do you care? And then the next part of trust is, do they actually know what they're saying, right? Do they know what they're talking about? Because that's the other thing. Like, this guy actually cares, but he can't help me. I love that you care, but I need somebody who can actually get stuff done. And when they rated those things, so you have two of them, right? And you can't be 50-50. They rated care over competence by a little bit. So people care more about if you care. You can get away with not knowing as much as somebody else if you care more.
Mm-hmm. But you still have to have a little bit of both, right?
You do. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can't be like, oh, yeah, I want to help you. I have no clue how to help you, but I want you to succeed. Well, then I love you, bud, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's like my mom, right? Like, I know she cares about me. I know she loves me. Is she the best business person in the world? Probably not.
Probably not. That's okay.
But I still love her, you know? But I'm not going to necessarily trust her with running my business.
Exactly. And that's exactly right.
But there are other people who care about me genuinely and show me that they care, but then they also have that competency.
And they know.
Fascinating. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it's great. That book was on body language, but she talked about how body language, was connected to trust, and then how your body language before people see you, they can tell if you care and if you know. And that's part of confidence. Anyway, that's a good one. I like that.
Very interesting. Cool. Yeah. Well, before we kind of wrap things up a little bit, Dalton, is there anything related to trust or brand loyalty or marketing that we have not touched on that you'd like to rant about a little bit?
No, I think we've hit everything on the head. I just think that, I know that I think one of the most, not one of the most, but when somebody says, like, if I can do it, anybody can do it, I get pretty skeptical of that. But I genuinely want people to know that you won't be good at it right away, but you can get there, and if you got a good coach and if you got a good team, like, you can learn how to do these things if you want to learn how to do these things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dalton. I'm going to point everyone over to your podcast. It's a great podcast if you just want to hear stories of startup entrepreneurs or small businesses. It's called The Thinking Project. Since you're probably listening to this in a podcast app right now, just click on the search button and type The Thinking Project, and you'll find Dalton's podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to plug, Dalton? Any place we should send people?
If they want to join the group, there's a Thinking Project group. But other than that, man, I appreciate your time, and I love talking with you.
And I'll add that Dalton does a great job on that group, guys. He asks genuine questions. It's not just a Facebook group where he's promoting his podcast. Like, he has some engaging questions in that group. So if you want to think a little more, it's a good place to hang out. So
yes, sir.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dalton. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Trustcast. This podcast has been a production of JMH Media. I'm Jacob Harmon, and I've been your host. The Trustcast podcast team consists of Josh Harmon and Steve Hill. I really couldn't do this without them. Music licensing comes thanks to Epidemic Sound. And if you've liked what you've heard, we invite you to subscribe to Trustcast in your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. It really does help. Join us next time as we continue to break through the noise by building real human connections and trust in business. See you then.